really don't know how to start.
Riley.
Hey, welcome to Proper Horror Show. This is my review of episode 2 of Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass. I'm doing these sort of episode by episode at the moment because there is a heck of a lot to say about each one. I'm also setting myself a little bit of a challenge at this point. I'm going to try and do this in one long take with no cuts. I'm feeling really inspired, by this really cool shot in episode 2. Not this one, obviously. No, this one. Mike Flanagan finally gave me a TV shot I can use because there wasn't much in episode 1 that I could hijack. It was pretty slim pickings, I've got to be honest. I'm also working against some sunlight that's probably going to come into my eyes over the course of this video. We'll see if we can cope with that. Anyway, we might as well address that long shot since Mike Flanagan was clearly super proud of it. It's obviously a style that he likes doing. He featured it very memorably in The Haunting of Hill House. In fact, he kind of built an episode around the use of these long, uninterrupted shots that are brilliant for building tension. And the reason they're so good at that is that they really ground you in the scene so much more effectively. When you have cuts, it is sort of reinforcing and reminding you of the artificiality of what you're watching, whereas when you have an uninterrupted take, you're able to just sort of empathize a lot more and kind of suspend your disbelief that you're watching something that is filmed and edited and produced. So that is very good when you want to build the tension up in a fairly spooky story. Now, I've got to be honest, in the case of Midnight Mass, while it was technically impressive, I don't think it particularly added anything in terms of tension or was particularly relevant to that. It's clearly something Mike Flanagan can do well and enjoys doing. I guess it made the scene that could have otherwise been kind of rote a bit more memorable, so maybe it was good on that level. I certainly don't think there was any reason not to do it as a single uninterrupted take, so maybe I'm just being a bit nitpicky. I am going to have to nitpick fairly extensively in this. I mean, there is some very clunky exposition that is dropped in this episode.
One full-blown alcoholic already who's responsible for the drunken hunting accident that paralyzed little Lisa, I'm told.
I also forgot to mention in episode 1 that there was the use of a composite shot. So that is where they have taken 2 takes separately with the focus on different areas and they have composited them together. And that sounds kind of cool when you've got 2 very different parts of the scene that you want to be able to focus on and they're incompatible because of the depth difference. But when you blend the shot, you do get kind of an awkward thing here, like this bit here with the blur. It just makes it very obvious that the scene is composited and it looks kind of artificial. I mean, look, guys, I have to get a nitpick in because otherwise it's just going to be effusive praise in these, especially for this episode. Now, before I get into the more theme-related things, I do want to reference here, I really felt the Stephen Kingfluence in episodes 2 and 3. Now that's as far as I've watched. I'm unspoiled beyond episode 3. I'm just going to talk about episode 2 in this one. And I'm probably going to segment some topics because they're a lot more relevant to episode 3 than to this one. But as for the Stephen Kingfluences, I got big vibes from The Mist with Bev Keane there. The things that befall canines and, of course, people's issues that they are wanting to be healed. Again, very much needful things. I also got big John Coffey and the Green Mile vibes from Father Paul. That's a lot more in episode 3, though. But still, the kind of groundwork is there in this episode. But obviously, the biggest, most prominent Stephen King influence is Salem's Lot. If you can forgive me, guys, I know we got bigger confirmations of the vampire storyline here. I'm not going to detail it very much in this episode. Basically, what we see in episode 2 just sort of intensifies and escalates what we saw and was set up in episode 1. But it's really It's really in episode 3 where we get so much more on it, so if you'll forgive me, I'm going to basically leave that discussion until then. My only gripe would be that there was an opportunity for the creature to kill this kid, and it didn't take it. That was very frustrating to me. I really don't like these kids. But yeah, we continue with a lot of setup in episode 2. This is character building that Mike Flanagan does so well, that is so essential when they have such an ensemble cast. So we're just learning a lot more about people and their problems that are going to probably be healed with an unfortunate cost over the course of the series. So that includes Dr. Gunning and her frail mother, Lisa and her injury, and Joe and his drinking. Joe is not a nice character, but Robert Longstreet's performance and the writing does a really good job of making him sympathetic even if you don't like him. There are things that you can empathise with here. Particularly, I mean, it's kind of a classic, but he's given a dog that he cares about more than anything. And yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. That was fun. I'm going to put that off a bit because I found it really upsetting. We'll deal with it later in this review. Because what I'm really keen to talk about is the way that this episode handles faith. I think if you're going to deal with religious themes, especially with Catholicism, you're going to have to talk about renewal and rebirth, right?
This is my favorite time of year. Renewal. Resurrection.
It's something that I was very worried about the show approaching because, frankly, faith does get covered, but I don't think it gets covered particularly well. There's a lot of ground that is trodden over and over again, and I think that it tends to be approached in a way that is very limited due to, say, network constraints and also just to the prevailing paradigm at the moment. The trouble is, what I'm basically saying, when you see something is going to deal with themes of faith and religion, is that you can basically predict exactly where it's going to go. That has not really been the case so far in Midnight Mass, and that is very much to its credit. And so I want to spend a fair amount of time talking about how it approaches that theme of faith and religion in episode 2 and why that is so good. So for a start off, the setting is creative. And that setting is the one-to-one AA meetings between Father Paul and Riley. I'm really hoping my voice holds out for this review. I have been very croaky all day, guys. Please forgive me. Please bear with me if I am super croaky. Now, this one-to-one conversation is basically inevitable. If you're dealing with the themes of faith and religion, you have to have the advocate for faith, and you have to have the advocate for rationalism and atheism. And those are often conflated, but not always. In this case, I feel they are very much conflated for Riley. Now, they could have basically just had an argument over anything. Father Paul could have been invited over for dinner by Riley's mother. But they didn't do that. They went for something a lot more interesting. They built off the established knowledge that we have from episode 1, that Riley has these conditions of parole, that he has to go to an AA meeting. This is a very good reason for them to start their own AA chapter, because the inconvenience of Riley having to go to the mainland is set up. You could problematise it and say there's all sorts of reasons he'd still want to go to the mainland. We're going to step over that. It's not particularly interesting. We're not going to quibble, okay? We're liking this setup. And I really like it because you get added tension and complexity, because in the AA meeting, there is already an imbalance of power between Father Paul and Riley. Father Paul is effectively providing something that Riley needs, and Riley is kind of reluctant, but he has to seek it from Father Paul. And it's sort of an interesting commentary on how that dynamic would usually be if Riley were a worshipper and Father Paul were the religious figure. The other reason that it's super interesting is that you have a requirement for Riley to keep having these conversations. It's not something that he could just avoid because it's an awkward conversation. And that is wonderfully highlighted in a joke that I think lands really well.
I gotta say, to be honest, I hadn't really considered how awkward this would be with just two people. I really don't know how to start.
Mike Flanagan can be really funny when he wants to be. Like, he has a very good sense of humour. And it's very welcome in his shows that otherwise can really hit you in the feels. But the other reason that this is such a good setup, having them have their sort of confrontation between faith and reason in an AA meeting, is that there is a kind of parallel symbolism here. Riley's problem is alcoholism. He basically has a thirst that is symbolically a deep need, an unquenchable need that is destructive. It's something he wants to do that is bad for him, is bad for people around him. But Father Paul also has a thirst that is destructive and bad for people around him. As I said, I've only watched up to the end of episode 3, so I don't know exactly how they're doing the vampirism storyline, but I'm going to take a wild assumption that Father Paul does still need to drink blood. In that case, he has a thirst that is destructive as well. They're basically in the same situation, trying to address a destructive need via different ways. This is nice and subtle because at this point, unless you're on a rewatch, I don't think you know this about Father Paul. You know he's mysterious, but you don't have the vampirism angle. This kind of parallel symbolism is understated. It's there for you to catch on the rewatch. It's really nice writing. I was impressed. Now, I was a little less impressed with what it did after this. It sort of headed into things that I'd been worried about. And that is specifically that they end up discussing theodicy. That is sort of the problem of evil, or basically, if God exists, why do bad things happen? Now, this is probably more personal to me, but it's just ground that I've seen covered over and over and over, and it's almost like a series of steps that you can predict, and you just basically know what people are going to do. I guess they almost have to cover it. It's something that would probably inevitably come up, but to be honest, I wasn't super interested in hearing it. But I was really interested in what they did after that. In a move that sort of surprised me, they ended effectively the balance of power in this conversation with Father Paul. Now, they didn't have him sort of destroy Riley with facts and logic. It's not that kind of show. It's all the better for that, in fact. But they did some interesting thing with Riley and his position. And they give Father Paul, I think, a version of faith that I've seen a lot more myself. And he talks about it more in a way that I've seen believers talk about in my own life. What I'm trying to point out here is, in a really interesting way, they have Riley giving the rational position in a way that sounds very much like a faith position.
Rational recovery. It's based more on reason and psychology. Addictive voice recognition technique. That's how it works, AVRT. And it's not that I want to drink, it's that the addictive voice wants to, the AV.
So in that clip I just played, he's talking about sort of, in a kind of almost Freudian way, these sort of psychological figments that are being created for him to put blame on. It doesn't sound super rational. It sounds kind of crazy in his own way, and I think that's quite an interesting choice. It's interesting to sort of see that. How can I say? It's interesting to see rationality actually treated with a bit of skepticism. That is not something that well, it's something that I hope the show would do, and I'm hoping they keep kind of even-handed as they explore the topic. As I said, I've got a lot of faith in Mike Flanagan, and I'm hoping he handles the topic well. The other thing that you get here is some really interesting cope from Riley. Now, he's kind of coped with the whole rational response thing, but he has his own cope on the idea of the Odyssey here. He says that effectively, people let things go to ruin. They let Joe continue to drink himself to death because they think it's part of God's plan. We don't like it, but inshallah, why would we interfere? I think Father Paul is indicating more through his actions and his words that is a massive cope. People aren't letting things go to ruin because they believe it's God's plan. They're not intervening and helping people because it's easier. It's way easier to just hope someone else will do it. Hope an institution takes care of it. I'm seeing that in the show. I don't know how much of this is my own bias, obviously. We're not going to be able to discuss any of these themes without our own viewpoints being very influential on what we see in the show. But I hope the stuff that I'm highlighting for you, while probably being far too revealing of my own positions, is backed up by what the show is showing us. I'm thinking back to, say, the crock pot luck, which is one of the sort of main parts of this episode, where Father Paul is talking about Joe and his alcoholism and basically pointing out that a lot of people are letting it happen, and people, for instance Riley, could intervene and do something effective. I think episode 3 gives us more information on Father Paul that helps us understand his perspective and why he's taking that approach a lot more. But it's already very interesting to see how he approaches things in episode 2. And while we're on the matter of the crock pot luck,
what happened? Who did this? Who did it?
Mike Flanagan got me. I have to foreground here. If you watch my videos a bit, you know that I have almost no tolerance whatsoever for animals being hurt. This was awkward. This was very difficult for me to watch. As I've said, Joe is not a likable character, but you do have sympathy with him. And you certainly have sympathy with his poor dog who looked like a beautiful creature. I found this really painful to watch. It really did the job. It was well acted. It was well shot. Damn you, Mike Flanagan. You got me gasping on this one. We've also had the setup that Beth Keane is very much going to be a villain over the course of the series. There's a little bit of light embezzling, but I think it's probably the cruelty to animals that seals the deal for me. I'm wishing some very, very nasty things on her, and I hope they are delivered. Please don't let me down, Mike. Please do very horrible things to Bev Keane. And I suppose I want to round off with this miraculous service that is the finale of the episode. In terms of how it approaches the theme of religion, I think it's kind of separate. So far, what they've done with the theme of religion, I think is really interesting. I am going to give a much more mixed review of episode 3, spoilers. But in this one, this is much more an exercise in tension, in sort of, building tension in the scene. Now, the trailer for Midnight Mass already showed that Lisa starts to walk, so that was kind of spoiled for me by the trailer, but it's also kind of common sense. I mean, bidding the lame to walk is your classic miracle. So it sort of makes sense that they went with this one. But the blocking of the scene builds something that is probably a bit predictable into something very special and memorable. We've already built up a lot of sympathy for Lisa, and Father Paul I think we're interested in, but we're not super comfortable around him. The way he's played, he's fascinating, but you are on edge around him.
Come on.
These elements are really well exploited by the scene because it looks like he is taunting Lisa. The fact that he backs off and goes up steps, you know, the blocking of that is perfect for building tension and then escalating, making it very clear that he's not just making it difficult for Lisa to get the forgive me, the communion wafer and receive the sacrament in her chair. He then makes it impossible. People's reaction in the scene sort of echo very much what I was feeling. It was very tense. It was incredibly unpleasant. It really has you on a knife edge here. And then it pays off wonderfully. It was really well done. Again, it's good music. It is good directing. It's very effective blocking. And it's wonderful performances put in for characters that you have had time to care about. This is great stuff. At this point, I can see why people are absolutely loving Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass. I am really hoping they keep it up. Currently, I am very comfortable calling the series Midnight Masterpiece. I genuinely hope it carries on earning that. This is fabulous. The review for episode 3 is going to come out really, really soon. It is going to be a bit more mixed, I've got to warn you. But that is no bad thing. This is complicated stuff. So I hope you really enjoyed it. As I said, I'm going to do a review for each episode of Midnight Mass, as people seem to really like the first one, and I'm definitely enjoying the chance to analyse the series. I think it may still get its own stream though, because I'd like to bring a much more religious perspective to the series, and I'm not particularly equipped to do that myself. But that is all in the future. Obviously, the next thing coming up is going to be our Tuesday live stream. We are starting our Jack the Ripper arc. Hope you can join us there Tuesdays at 8 British time. And I will get the review of episode 3 up as soon as I can. So I'll leave it off there. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.
Real Horrorshow.